Tom, welcome to the Commerce Talks podcast. Today we are going to talk about marketplaces and a marketplace maturity model. We try to understand what is a marketplace, what is a platform, and what are the common mistakes by building a marketplace. You are an industry veteran. I would even say you're an industry veteran in the marketplace space, but we will come to that in a minute. Can you give like a short pitch of your life in the e-commerce industry so listeners here in the podcast understand what kind of competence level we are talking today?
Great. Well, first off, thanks, Alex, for having me on the Commerce Talks podcast. It's an honor to be with you today. A little bit about our journey through the digital commerce world. So McFadyen Digital started 35 years ago, pre-commerce, but what we really started doing was document management, engineering document management, which morphed into content management, web content management. So in the 80s, we're doing document management, early 90s, web content management, mostly static brochureware sites. And then in the late 90s, around 97, we started doing commerce as SSL really enabled the secure transactional capabilities in 95, 96. That was a major transition. In the start of many companies like Intershop, Broadvision, Vignette, ATG, that really started a lot of our commerce practice in the dot-com heyday of the late 90s. We saw the bubble grow and the bubble burst, fortunately, riding through the ups and downs of that kind of crazy time. And I think there's some analogies of that time to where the market is today. So a lot of lessons learned from that era. We continue doing commerce and still do lots of commerce projects today. But for the past 5-6 years, it's been pretty much exclusively marketplaces that we go to market with. More than half of that work actually is e-commerce, of course, because it is a transactional system. But we really got into marketplaces 15 years ago, almost by accident. And we certainly didn't call them marketplaces back then. I called them federated commerce or other multi-channel, multi-storefront implementations. And some of those early projects one was a $1 billion site for the U.S. government, for the U.S. Army. All the IT procurement happened through this marketplace with some pretty sophisticated B2B capabilities like punch out and ordering workflows and so forth. And really, marketplaces became more popular phrase starting in 2010, and really about half a decade ago, it became much more popular and much more understood by people. I think there's still a lot of confusion around what the word marketplace means, what the word platform means, which is really a whole other subject we can talk about today too.
Okay, and your profile on the McFadyen website, I saw that you've been involved in hundreds of big enterprise projects. So you saw technologies even as old as ATG from Oracle, WebSphere, SAP Hybris, the rise in the US like 10 years ago, and many more. I would assume that even on top of the old technology providers, there have been some marketplace projects. Like I can remember some projects I've been involved in within 2008, 2009, and there was no marketplace software around. So we tried to build on top of Magento, for example, and I'm pretty sure people did it with the Java-based software solutions too. Do you still remember how this went?
Yes, painfully. So in the days of having to build everything custom from scratch, maybe referring also to BOL in Europe, which was built on ATG back in the pre-2010, I think there was early 2000s. We built a lot of these sites on ATG as well. And they were multi-year projects, sometimes a $10 million implementation cost, 3 years to build out a marketplace. Teleflora was an example of that. So very expensive, very time-consuming. But again, that was the limitation of the technology back in those days. Today's technology platforms like Spryker are much more capable with more modern technology, with marketplace capability built into them. So those timeframes for implementation can now be several months, a handful of months. And you can usually drop off a 0 or 2 on the implementation cost for launching the marketplace, depending on the scale and scope of it. But
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
In our experience building out sites, we certainly worked with a lot of B2B, and that's really our favored segment, as obviously is a great strength of Spryker. And we've built probably over 10 different B2B marketplaces that generate over $1 billion of sales, of GMV, gross merchandise value, or top line revenue sales. And that's where we see kind of the sweet spot. We've been fortunate to work with over 10% of the Fortune 500 enterprises in building digital commerce solutions.
And what do you think is a driver of this new marketplace initiatives like 20 years ago, and especially in B2B? So in B2B, we still have not even reached the 1P e-commerce level. So companies still have a hard time of really providing a fully digitized customer journey, and now suddenly want to jump into the marketplace game. So what is the driver for the marketplace initiatives? What have you seen there?
So it is truly a business transformation. It's a different business model, an economic model. And maybe this may be a good time to talk about the pipeline versus platform concepts.
Yeah.
So first party e-commerce, and in fact, retail for millennia has really been a pipeline process. So by pipeline, we mean sequential series of events that have to happen one after another, often very labor intensive activities. So a traditional e-commerce site, B2C or B2B, and even brick and mortar retail involves usually somebody sourcing goods. So they have to find products from distributors or manufacturers. They have to negotiate contracts. And sometimes, especially in some B2B industries, that can take 1 to 2 months just to negotiate the contracts. That has to be loaded into the ERP. And that's typically, a fairly cryptic 40-character description of the product. That integration into ERP can take some time. Then the marketing team will merchandise the goods, creating the SEO optimized text, taking the photographs, organizing it appropriately in the proper categories, setting up the proper cross sells, upsells, etc. Merchandising can be a very labor intensive activity as well. The retailer or B2B distributor also sets the price, which sounds trivial, but it's actually an important differentiation between pipeline versus platform. We'll get back to that. They have to hold the inventory, and this is both physically and financially. So you need to have the distribution centers, the fulfillment capabilities to manage all the goods that you're sourcing, which is obviously capital intensive to build out the infrastructure, but also capital intensive in having to purchase the goods and put cash out first before actually receiving cash in from the customer. Then processing the orders, typically that's automated. And fulfilling the orders, another labor-intensive step, and very expensive as well for many retailers, B2B distributors, having to fulfill that. So all those activities are very labor-intensive sequence that have to happen, again, typically 1 to 2 months for that full life cycle, sometimes more, to actually get a product out to a customer. So that's the pipeline concept. Platform, on the other hand, marketplaces as a platform business just have standard terms and conditions for all sellers. So it's one document applies to all sellers, no matter how many you onboard. They may reference things like a commission grid for it's 10% commission or 15% commission or 20% commission. Terms like how quickly you need to fulfill, how quickly you need to respond to customer queries. And you typically only have 2 major labor categories in there or organizational roles that have to be fulfilled. One to recruit sellers and the other to support the sellers. And then the processing orders, but again, that's automated, much like in the pipeline business. So you build up this network effect, which is really an exponential scalability as opposed to the linear scalability of a pipeline, in that you have many parallel third-party sellers. And those third-party sellers do all that, much of that pipeline of activity. So they source goods, they negotiate contracts, they load their catalog, they merchandise the products, they set the price, they hold the inventory, they fulfill the orders. So all that sequential activity turns into a parallel activity where you have dozens, hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of sellers doing all that in parallel. And in fact, I mentioned the setting the price. This is part of that flywheel that Amazon's so well known for, is the third-party sellers end up competing against each other to drive down the price. So they want to win the buy box on the product detail page that says they are the recommended seller of this product. And that drives down the price for the customer, drives more customers to the site, keeps the flywheel going. And in fact, we've seen this model expand where it's not just resellers sourcing goods from distributors. It can be distributors selling directly on a marketplace, or it can be manufacturers selling directly on a B2B distributor's marketplace. So it really becomes more parallel. And that series of, I think it's 9 steps gets sourced out. Most of it gets sourced out to third-party sellers. And we talked about evolution from, in the marketplace maturity model, defines 5 stages, similar to capability maturity model for software development, or CMMI. So the first stage is first-party commerce, which we talked about, those sequence of activities that have to happen in a pipeline manner. The second tier of the marketplace maturity model is dropship. And dropship is a minor incremental improvement because only 2 of those 9 steps gets outsourced to somebody else. Somebody else fulfills the orders and somebody else holds the inventory. But the B2B distributor or the e-commerce operator still has to source goods, negotiate contracts, load them into ERP, merchandise them, set the price, process the order. All those activities still have to be done by the dropship operator or the e-commerce operator that's leveraging dropship providers. Versus in tier 3 of the marketplace maturity model, the third-party marketplace, that's when you truly become a platform and all those activities become outsourced to third-party sellers and can operate in parallel. Level 4 of the marketplace maturity model, like CMM, is quantitative management. So this is when the data and the numbers really drive the marketplace scale. So as sellers perform well, they get promoted to premier sellers, get better options to get the buy box. If they perform poorly, they get suspended automatically if their rating falls below 3.5. If certain third-party goods performing exceptionally well, an operator may decide to take them in as first-party inventory or even bring them into a brick-and-mortar store if they're a retailer, omni-channel retailer. Or if a first-party good is moving very slowly, seasonal, or difficult to fulfill, maybe they outsource that to third-party sellers. So letting that data really manage the business at tier 4. And level 5 is optimizing, much like CMM as well, where you innovate with new business models. And Amazon and Alibaba and Walmart have been excellent at doing this. So it could be you adding not just having a physical goods marketplace, but adding a services marketplace where you have third-party providers of services or digital goods services, digital goods as well, or innovating with omni-channel integration or live streaming, many different ways in which a business can innovate at the optimizing tier of marketplace maturity model.
And let's go back to the first step, to the dropship model. So I remember the first dropship business models. Those were the business models with this that laid behind CSN, Hayneedle, and many, many more. Those were those were in the early days of e-commerce when we all had the impression that we now need multi-niche category retailers. I don't know, bed.com, sofa.org, whatever. And these were all like drop shipping businesses, right?
Pets.com.
Yeah. Yeah. But those multi-niche retailers were operated by like one entity, and they had like, let's say 100 domains, different niches, and they had a lot of this kind of drop shipping businesses behind. Do you still see it around a lot these days, or is every manufacturer, every distributor trying to change the model into the 3P marketplace model?
People become aware of the model, and as these products become available on multiple sources, and one of our clients, Ferguson, acquired Build.com, and they operated Faucets.com and Doorknobs.com and a whole bunch of those example micro sites, same e-commerce engine underneath it, but different domain, which was supposed to be the unique area. Now people are looking more for that all-in-one solution. So a marketplace can add two benefits, or benefits on two ways if you're playing offense or playing defense. So you can look at it as, I've got the customer has 4 items in the cart and we want to increase our AOV and have them cross-sell them the fifth product to add into their cart, which is from a marketplace. And that's playing offense, which is great to increase your AOV. But it's also playing defense. If somebody's looking for those 5 products and you only have 4 of them and they can't find the 5th one, they want to just place one order, they may go to Amazon or somewhere else to get that fifth product and move the entire 5 items of that cart to a competitor's website. And so it's not just losing that 5th product in the cart, it's losing all 4 or all 5 of the products that could be in the cart. So it's both a offensive play and a defensive play.
And you've said that most marketplaces you've seen and you've helped to be built are following this kind of buy box model. What we are also seeing is in B2B that it's not about the price anymore. So it's not really buy box competition, because orders on offers might be super exclusive, and it's more an availability game and not so much a pricing game.
Absolutely. The out of stock dilemma that the supply chain issues of the past 2 years have been a major factor for a lot of organizations. So, and that's also something that is a concern of many marketplace operators or those going into the marketplace business or considering it is, oh no, I'm going to have cannibalization. Well, actually, it's not a real concern. It should not be a concern, because it actually helps with winning that customer and keeping that customer. So especially with the increased supply chain challenges, having that out of stock on a product means that customer is most likely going to go to your competitor's website. And again, they may not take just that one cart. There may be future carts that go to the competitor for ordering if you're not able to stock those goods. So certainly the marketplace business model where you have parallel third-party sellers provides a much more resilient supply chain and sourcing of goods to your customer and avoiding those out of stock situations.
Do you see many marketplace projects are still influenced a lot by the features and functions of Amazon.com?
They certainly are the leader in the US. Alibaba in China, Mercado Libre in Latin America. So certainly they are setting the standard and the pace. It's going to be hard for any retailer to really catch up to Amazon. Walmart's probably got the best chances, and they're doing very well with their marketplace as well. Amazon has really been a disruptor in the industry, and not just in their marketplace, but how they've transformed commerce and other services from AWS to FBA. But if you diagnose their earnings report, FBA and the massive investment they've been making in their distribution capabilities has actually been a low margin or negative margin business for them. But that's driving more sellers to their site, which enables them to sell more advertising services. They have a huge retail media network. So in just 10 years, they grew to be the number 3 advertising platform in the world. Google's number 1, Facebook's number 2, and Amazon is number 3 with $31 billion of advertising spend on their retail media network last year.
Okay, and do you think it makes sense for let's look at a B2B company like 2 or 3 billion in their category, maybe close to category leader. Does it make sense for them when they're building the marketplace to take Amazon as an example?
Certainly, there are a lot of lessons to be learned there. We find that, and this goes to the philosophy: is a marketplace a winner-take-all market? And we think that there are lots of different niche B2B areas in which B2B marketplace operator can be highly successful. So I'll list through a few of our clients right now. One is a chemical distribution company. If you need to get a truckload of a hazmat chemical, you're not going to buy that on Amazon. Or if you need to do certain other searches and get the material safety data sheets and other related aspects to chemical distribution, which is a highly fragmented and highly inefficient industry, and probably not something that Amazon is going to go into, that they have a great opportunity to really dominate that space. And Amazon's probably not going to go in there. Another one of our clients sells fasteners, a base supply, and everybody jokes about, well, it's just a nuts and bolts industry. Well, if you want to find certain specifics for high volume, for aerospace, for certain constraints, they leverage the marketplace model to scale to up to 500,000 SKUs of fasteners, nuts, bolts, screws, rivets, all types of materials, all types of ratings, and high volume. So in fact, they can dominate the fastener space, and even some of the bigger or industrial supply companies are sourcing goods from Bay Supply, Bay Fastener. Again, a little niche of nuts and bolts. You think, well, how can somebody own that space? But there are lots of other industries in which a niche good with special requirements, maybe it's a CPQ, configure price quote need for a good that's difficult to sell. Those are a lot of areas for companies to exceed and excel in different areas. If we want to look at a B2C analogy, Amazon, Walmart, of course, are very successful marketplaces selling apparel. So you say, well, that market's taken up. Nobody's going to have any chance to run an apparel marketplace. One of your earlier guests was StockX, and GOAT is a similar company to that. They sell sneakers, and these two companies grew in 7 years to be multi-billion-dollar companies selling sneakers. Maybe a lot of them are $1,000, specialized Air Jordans that sneakerheads really love. But apparel is a market that already has big players, but you can still build a highly successful multi-billion-dollar marketplace selling apparel in those niche areas. Similarly for B2B.
I'm looking at the balance sheet of Amazon. Then I can see that the revenue source for earning money out of the marketplace is less like the listing fee and is more and more fees like financing fees, logistic fees, FBA fees. So it's far beyond of the initial idea of just offering your website as a window to your customers and therefore charge 5%, 10%, whatever. It's far more fees. Going back to your B2B examples, in B2B usually just don't have such a big margin. So everything beyond like 2% might be way too much for the nuts and bolts business. Plus, you won't be willing to add financial services, logistics services, advertising services on top, because that's just not part of your business model, and maybe you cannot afford it. Still, do you see examples in this space where marketplaces are following even this more advanced trajectory of distributing earnings into other categories, not just listing fees?
Absolutely. And in fact, maybe the financial model of a marketplace is something we should delve into. We have a chapter on that in our book, Marketplace Best Practices. And to break down the ROI and the financial model of a marketplace, let's look at the top line, which is the revenue, and the bottom line, which is the expense. We mentioned that you have much smaller headcount which is on the bottom part of the ROI equation. So your labor costs can be a lot smaller with a marketplace model. In fact, they're often called capital light business models, where you don't have the heavy expense of fulfillment centers or high, merchandising staff or big fulfillment operations. So the bottom number typically can be decreased, the cost, and the upper part of the ROI equation, the revenue or GMV side, can be broken down into a number of different fees, as you mentioned. But let's look at where the revenue comes from a marketplace. In traditional retail or e-commerce, it's a buy low, sell high. Your profits are the difference between what you purchased it for and what you sold it for.
We call it retail 1.0. Offline and online, that's the same.
Exactly. And instead of buy low, sell high, a marketplace is enable others to sell, take a slice of the pie. So you build a platform on which other people can sell their products, and you take a slice of that pie. And most typically, it's the commission, which we mentioned 10%, 15%, 5%, depending on the category, depending on the seller. And that commission grid is typically dynamic and can be adjusted based on the categories or other criteria. Many other ways of monetizing a marketplace include advertising, and we'll get back to Amazon, as you mentioned. 31 billion. I think the last quarter was 8 billion, more than 8 billion, 8 or 9 billion of the retail media network. And a lot of other companies are launching, especially in grocery, are launching retail media networks to monetize the traffic that they gain from the marketplace sellers and the marketplace customers, the buyers and the sellers on their platform. But those fees for sellers can be typically also a monthly fee. So to be a basic member, it's $25 a month. To be a premier member, it's $40 a month, and you get higher placement in the search results. Or other benefits, you pay 1% less commission if you're a premier seller. There can be listing fees. eBay is like this, where if you want to list a product on eBay, it costs you a couple dollars to list it there. There can be lead fees and this is typical in B2B often, where you don't actually complete the transaction on the marketplace, but you just provide the lead to the seller to complete the transaction outside of the marketplace with the customer. The advertising can be all types of forms. It can be, prioritize you at the top of the search result. It can be banner ads. It can be site stores on the site for the brand. Many different ways, and Amazon seems to be coming out with new ways of monetizing their retail media network every month to enable sellers or to extract more money from sellers, depending on how you're looking at it.
Yeah, just saw a documentary today from the biggest German news channel where they were reporting about the so-called Amazon monopoly, and a lot of sellers reported there that it became kind of unbearable, because there were so many new revenue streams added from Amazon and became so unfair over time that they became merely a logistics company. Like people that really were proud about their assortment capabilities and sourcing capabilities, they are just like a logistics company now, trying to earn money. Is it something this kind of end game Amazon is in right now, which eventually leads maybe to some cartel legislation where they will break it up? Is this something you're involved in discussions in? Because like from a business point of view, it's cool. So like obviously Amazon is making money. They've done the right thing. They are now too successful. But like from the moral standpoint, I would say that's a very different discussion here.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of debate whether the platform business model is too powerful. And we see lots of these battles working out in the legal system and in the actions of individual sellers. So a lot of sellers, especially Chinese sellers, moved off Amazon, or maybe they still stay on Amazon, but they also work on Walmart, because that is a major risk to a seller. If for valid or invalid reasons you get kicked off of Amazon and your entire business is selling on Amazon, your revenue stream is pretty much shut off. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing that's also happening with these, and this is a trend that may go up and may die, but there's been huge investment in the e-commerce aggregators like Thrashio and Heyday and some of these organizations that have raised billions of dollars to aggregate or buy lots of little sellers and in attempt to build up the next big brand like the CPG companies. They're not there, and some of this investment has slowed, and whether that's a viable business model is yet to be seen. But certainly there's last year $12 billion went into aggregating e-commerce sellers. So, and some of these like Thrasio were buying an e-commerce seller, an Amazon seller every week, adding a new brand to their portfolio. But back to the question, are marketplaces and the platform business model too powerful? One of the big cases, public cases where this has played out has been Epic Games versus Apple and Google. So in the digital goods marketplace, we can talk about different types of marketplaces, services marketplaces, or marketplaces for services, marketplaces for digital goods, marketplaces for physical goods. But in the digital goods marketplaces of of Apple and Google, they cumulatively generate $130 billion of revenue, $130 billion. And most of that is at a 30% commission rate, sometimes 15%, but most of it is at 30%. So imagine that Apple and Google collect about $30 billion from their digital goods marketplace. And that is almost pure profit, very high gross margin revenue. And again, that gets to the difference between GMV and revenue, but $30 billion roughly of almost pure profit. So Epic Games doesn't like that because they sell about $1 billion of Fortnite annually, including in-game purchases. And they were paying, using that same round number of 30%, $300 million to Apple and Google as the commission for their digital goods. Even Amazon is kind of on the loser side, if you will, of the marketplace game, where on Amazon Kindle, for example, our book, if you wanted to get our Marketplace Best Practices book on Kindle, you can't buy it. You can't get it on the Kindle app on your iPhone, your iPad, or Android, because you have to pay, Amazon would have to pay 30% of that money to Apple. If you bought a digital good in the Kindle app, like a book, you would have to pay 30% to Apple. So if you want to get the book, you have to go to Amazon.com website, buy it there, add it to your Kindle library, and then you can view it on your iPhone, your iPad, or other device. But that commission rate is very powerful, very expensive also for the sellers. Now back to legislation and what can happen there. The U.S., the antitrust laws are generally written to protect the consumer. So they stop bad actors from monopolizing, oil or other limited resources and jacking up the price. So it's a bad service and it's a bad price for the consumer. Marketplaces like Amazon tend to provide better services, better goods, better pricing to the customer than first party e-commerce. So it's hard to break up or threaten to break up Amazon based on how they're treating the customer, because the customer really in the end gets a better deal from Amazon. The third party sellers, as you mentioned, are complaining about being treated poorly. It used to be Walmart that was known for treating their sellers, their vendors poorly and beating up their vendors. Now Walmart's the nice guy and Amazon's the bad guy for the sellers. So it'd be interesting to see if the laws change about protecting the third party sellers as opposed to protecting the consumer as they're currently written. It also makes it very difficult for tech startups to succeed when the big tech platforms will end up buying a lot of them or stopping a lot of them.
Same discussion we have in Europe now. Really something the consumer is benefiting from. But on the long term, maybe there's going to be some changes. Let's see. I've met some business models or some company founders that are still opposed against the idea of building a marketplace. And let me give you like the two examples here, and I'd like to hear your opinion. So one example is a business called Böttcher, which is an office supply business in Europe, mainly Germany, 600 million, very focused on small B2B customers, so SMBs, which are getting their office supplies, sometimes consumer electronic stuff, and their replacement battery for their screwdriver, whatever. And they say our core value is that we can ship everything we have on our website like within 24 hours. And there's a very, very good invoice quality for our customers. Our website is not very complex. If you were watching now the website, it reminds you of something based out of 2005, 2006. It's not very complex, easy to find everything. We don't want to scrutinize this kind of experience with bad product data, bad inventory data, apart from this whole invoice headache. And actually, that's one of the reasons why consumers are going there, because the whole invoice B2B thing on Amazon.de, Amazon FR, it's not working at all. It's like maybe in 60% of the cases, but it's still very buggy. So what do you say to Mr. Böttcher? Good decision, or should he consider marketplace strategies in the future?
So as maturity evolves in the marketplace, there certainly are techniques for doing the proper seller integration, doing the proper curation, and even leveraging some AI or some sophisticated tools to improve the inventory and order management and catalog information to ensure data accuracy. That one part of the implementation process is the defining the taxonomy, which is how you harmonize catalogs and category structures from dozens, hundreds of sellers into your core catalog structure and data structures for your customer-facing e-commerce site. So that's certainly one issue that needs to be addressed, and it can be addressed, and it has been addressed by many people very successfully. So I think the technology challenge of integrating catalogs and inventory levels and order status has been solved. So that's a fear that doesn't have to be, that's, I'd say, somewhat unfounded. It certainly is an activity that has to be performed, but it's not an insurmountable activity. The other aspect, I think, is the curation level, and marketplaces can vary in the amount of curation that they do, from the least amount when you think of like eBay, and in the early days, anything goes in the wild, wild west, rumors of human organs being sold on eBay and all kinds of crazy things, to much more highly curated luxury goods, high-end retail marketplaces where the category curation, the product curation, and the content curation is highly controlled, meaning that you don't allow certain goods that you don't want on your site, which you feel may diminish your brand, or the seller is not of a high quality. You can curate out the sellers, the categories, the products, etc.
Okay, then the second example. The other one is called Thomann, which is the leading European retailer for professional audio equipment. So if you're doing concerts, if you're recording podcasts, microphones like this, they are provided by Thomann. Thomann is doing 1 billion euro in revenue, and the whole market in this category in Europe is 4 billion. And then I approached them, obviously, and said, okay, it totally makes sense with your powerful market positioning to build a marketplace, because you can do kind of a second-hand thing, because all this very expensive equipment goes through eBay now, or through other third-party C2C platforms. And on the other hand, you're so powerful, all the very, very cool customers, other manufacturers would pay money to be listed on your marketplace. But I said, no, we don't want to do it, because same here, we have very professional consumers. They expect from us a very high delivery quality. They expect new products. They expect all the new data sheets. So we cannot afford, from, let's say, 1 out of 50 marketplace products sold, to have one bad experience. So same opinion here from your side?
So they can certainly do the curation again. So I have a similar experience. We just bought a 4K video camera, and buying one off of Amazon, I don't trust the ratings and reviews there. Are these fake?
Same here.
Is it a knockoff brand? Is it authentic good? But instead purchase from BH Photo, which is more of a consumer-focused, high-end video and photography site in the US, which I draw some parallels to this professional-focused business in Europe. So certainly they have the brand to drive the trust. If they do the proper curation, again, it's a matter of doing that curation, which is still, it's not like when you launch a marketplace that you have given up all sense of control of your site, the content on your site, the products on your site, the categories on your site. You still curate that. You still do have that control. The second hand, they could offer the authentication or refurbished certification of those goods. So we talked about StockX and Goat. They provide authentication that, yes, this is a 2010 Air Jordan that's worth $1,000 or $2,000, whatever that sneaker happens to be worth. Satair runs a marketplace that's part of Airbus, and they have a marketplace for refurbished airplane parts. It's not something you're going to want to buy off eBay to put on your passenger airline. You want to have that trusted certification of a knowledgeable, trusted source like Airbus or Satair, their airplane parts business, to validate the quality of that. And that's been hugely successful for Satair, which again is professional segment, needs to be highly trusted, needs to be quality goods because human lives depend on it. So I'd say there are ways of curating and even authenticating the goods as a service. And that could be justification for charging more than those used goods would be sold for on eBay if they can authenticate them.
Okay. Have you seen examples where companies B2C or B2B moved into the marketplace game and then said, okay, that it's not working for us, we're going to stop it?
Absolutely. It happens quite a bit. Our book's called Marketplace Best Practices, but there are lots of marketplace bad practices.
Oh.
So one example of what happened is, and this happened, we've seen this several times at some big Fortune 500 companies. They're tentative about getting into the marketplace space. So they say, well, we're going to try it out on this different website under a different domain, and we're not going to sell competing products to our core categories. And that ends up failing. We've seen that fail quite a few times. I'm not going to mention business names, but some very well-known, globally recognized names where it's failed. And they launch again, perhaps in a different country, and it's highly successful for them, but they've launched integrated third-party goods in with their first-party goods on the core business site, core e-commerce site, and even offering competing products to their own goods, so that they're not worried about cannibalization. They feel that if they're out of stock, better to let the consumer buy a product from a competitor and take the 15% commission instead of losing the transaction and perhaps losing the customer. So that's one of the bad practices, is not integrating the third-party goods in with the first-party goods in the same site and not marketing it.
But maybe let's stick with this bad practice just for a minute, because that's easy to say for us. Like, we are coaches, like from the sideline, we're not in the game. Like, if you're in the game, in the company, and there's a procurement department or a purchasing department, whatever you want to call it, and has to discuss the marketplace idea with this kind of new business owner who comes with this fancy marketplace idea, then the procurement department usually say, Tom, I understand the idea, but if there's really products out there our customer wants and we don't have them listed, let them buy us. So we will buy the products. It's still in our standard inventory rule. And for what reason should we compete with other vendors selling the same products? Then we have to pay our own inventory and purchasing price, and we don't control the quality. And these discussions you usually have a lot in the beginning of a marketplace project. And those are not easy to solve, even though from an outside coach perspective, we would say that doesn't matter. That's the wrong move. So what is the shortcut? What is the trick, your advice here you can give for those discussions?
Not only the procurement team, we also see that challenge raised by the merchandising team. So head of merchandising will, because it's their careers. They may have dozens or more people doing merchandising and sourcing goods, and that's their career. Well, if we bring on a marketplace, we're going to have to fire all these people. Well, you don't necessarily have to fire them. You can reassign them into different roles to operate the marketplace. But the answer to that is typically just do a quick solution to that is just search for certain goods that somebody going to that retailer or distributor site would probably look for, and show them hey, here's the null result on your site. And if I search on one of your competitors who's also a distributor or retailer, but they have a marketplace, and here you see on Best Buy, for example, Best Buy Canada, who operates a marketplace. Oh, here they have 350 of these camera accessories that you have 0 of, if it's in the example of camera goods. So showing the results of comparing a competitor who does operate a marketplace to one that does not is certainly an easy way. Another aspect is looking at the financial model and the scalability. Yes, you can hire more people to source more goods and to merchandise more goods and to fulfill more goods, but that is expensive, linearly scaling business as opposed to the exponential scale of the platform economic business model. So how quickly can you scale that and look at the financial model of, okay, you need to hire this many more merchandisers, build out this many more fulfillment centers, add this many more vendors that you need to manage, and the costs of all that when you do the financial modeling show that it's not a highly profitable or highly scalable business approach.
Okay, that was one very, very remarkable bad practice. And as the last questions, do you have another bad practice you see often that needs to be solved?
So it's important to realize that the marketplace is an ecosystem. It's a two-sided, sometimes it can be three-sided or four-sided, but at a minimum, marketplace is two sides. And everybody's used to in e-commerce and retail marketing and attracting and catering to the customers. But in a marketplace, you need to market and attract and cater and support the sellers. So people will tend to not hire the marketplace, the people to recruit sellers and to manage and support sellers. It's a chicken and egg. You need both. If you're starting new, if you're an existing distributor or retailer, you already have the customer side, but you need to quickly ramp up the seller side.
In some presentations and even a keynote I recently gave, I said that the transformation from a brick and mortar model, a mail order business or brick and mortar model into e-commerce was way easier than the transformation from a retail business model into a marketplace model. That's because it's so different from a business model perspective. Would you agree or disagree?
It's kind of like in the .com, after the .com heyday, there are lots of retailers who said this digital thing, that's not for us. It's a passing fad. The internet's going to pass. I don't think it's going to pass. I think it's a fundamental transformation of business. If you go back in history, there's yet another big retail transformation that happened about 100 years ago. Before 100 years ago, at least in the US, all the retailers would, a customer would come into a counter and the retail employee would go back in the back of the store, pick up the goods, put them in a cart or a bag, bring them forward, and then the customer would check out. Piggly Wiggly, about 100 years ago, transformed that business model by enabling customers to self-serve and go pick goods off the shelf and fill their own cart or their own bag, shopping bag, and check out. And lots of retailers said, oh, that's a crazy idea. There's going to be all kinds of shoplifting and theft. It's never going to work. Yet Piggly Wiggly took this transformation and became the number one grocer with 2,600 stores in a little over a decade. They transformed that segment of retail and dominated, much like Amazon dominated in that same type of time frame, 10 to 15 years. And what they did is they shifted that labor from the employees to the customers. Marketplaces shift labor from the employer, the retailer, to the third-party sellers. So it's a major shift of the economic model. So I think it's here to stay. I think it's, in terms of how difficult the transition is, I think once somebody is enabled with the concept of commerce, doesn't have to necessarily be a strong commerce platform, because they can re-platform with platforms that include commerce and marketplace like Spryker, and launch it. And the now at this current state, where a lot of customers and a lot of third-party sellers, there are 22 million sellers out there now, are eager to launch on additional marketplaces. So the supply of sellers is there, the technology is there, the understanding of the business concept is there. So I think it's a lot easier now for e-commerce organizations to transform into marketplaces than it was for companies that had been traditional brick and mortar companies for decades or centuries to transform into digital online businesses.
No, I agree. Tom, thank you for your time.